The day had started normally for Daniel Parker, a 22-year-old college student living in Colorado. Winter had arrived early that year, and the town was already covered in white. Daniel was used to its snowstorms, came and went every season, but he had no idea that this particular evening would take a turn. He would never forget. He was sitting at his small desk, finishing an online assignment when his phone vibrated. It was his best friend, Ethan Miller. Ethan rarely called during work hours, so Daniel picked up immediately. "Hey, man," Ethan said, sounding rushed. "Listen, can you do me a favor? I left some paperwork at my mom's cabin outside town. I need it tonight, but I can't get off early. Could you pick it up for me?" Daniel didn't even hesitate. "Yeah, sure. I'll head out now." He had known the Millers since middle school. Ethan was like a brother, and Ethan's mom, Laura, had always been warm and kind toward him. After her divorce last year, she had moved full-time to the cabin where she worked remotely. Daniel had visited many times. It always felt peaceful there. He threw on his thick jacket, grabbed his keys, and headed out. Snowflakes drifted slowly at first, light and harmless, but the sky looked heavy. The radio warned of a sudden cold front moving fast. But Daniel assumed he'd make the trip before things got bad. The drive up the forest road was quiet and beautiful. Pine trees stood tall on both sides, their branches heavy with white dust. Each mile felt colder, but Daniel pushed forward, focused on helping Ethan. The storm outside showed no sign of slowing down. Snow lashed against the cabin windows in thick sheets, and the wind groaned like it was testing the walls. Daniel and Laura stood by the door, both aware that leaving was no longer an option. The forest road they had driven in on was quickly disappearing under heavy drifts. And there was no way Daniel could make it back safely. Laura closed the door firmly and locked it. "We're staying here," she said, trying to sound calm. "The storm's too strong. It's better to wait it out than risk getting stranded outside." Daniel nodded, feeling a mix of relief and unease. Being stranded wasn't the worst thing he was used to. Rough weather, but he wasn't sure how long the storm would last. The cabin was warm, but the thought of the cold outside made him shiver. He realized the situation was bigger than just a drive gone wrong. Laura quickly lit candles, placing them around the room. Their soft glow flickered against the walls, casting gentle shadows. The fire crackled in the fireplace, but the heat didn't reach every corner. The cabin was cozy, but as the storm intensified, it began to feel smaller. Every gust of wind made the windows rattle, and the silence between them carried a weight. The two moved closer to the fire. Laura wrapped herself in a thick blanket, pulling it tightly around her shoulders. Daniel did the same, feeling the cold seep into his bones despite the fire. He watched her for a moment, her calm yet alert expression. The way she carefully adjusted the blanket around herself and felt a strange warmth beyond the fire. She carried a quiet strength. He realized he had always admired that about her. "We should sit near the fireplace," Laura said. "It'll be warmer here." They settled side by side, blankets draped over their laps. The wind howled, snow piling up against the cabin walls, but inside, the fire made the room glow softly. Neither spoke for a while, listening to the storm and the faint cracking of the wood. After a moment, Laura sighed. "It's nights like this that make you realize how fragile we are," she said quietly. Her voice carried a mix of fatigue and honesty that surprised Daniel. He hadn't heard her talk like this before. Daniel looked at her, feeling the words resonate. "Yeah," he said softly. "You never really know what's coming until it hits." She nodded, her eyes distant. Sometimes life moves so fast, you don't get a moment to catch your breath. And then a storm like this reminds you how small everything feels. Daniel didn't interrupt. He simply listened. It felt intimate, but not inappropriate just to people caught in a situation neither could control. Sharing a quiet moment of understanding, the heater gave a weak hiss and clicked off. The warmth from the fire and the candles was enough to keep them comfortable. But the cabin now carried the sharp chill of winter. Laura shifted closer to the fire, her hand brushing against the blanket Daniel had draped over himself. She glanced at him and said softly, "It's going to get colder. We might need to keep each other warm if the night gets worse." Her words were practical, matter of fact. Yet Daniel felt an emotional jolt. It wasn't romantic in a physical sense. It was human, caring, and tender. He nodded and offered a small smile. "We'll be fine," he said. "We can manage together." The two of them settled into a quiet rhythm. They didn't speak much, but the presence of another person offered comfort against the storm outside. Daniel thought about how often life had felt lonely for both of them, Laura, after her divorce. Himself dealing with college and family pressures. Being here, even in an unexpected situation, created a strange sense of closeness. Hours passed. The wind banged against the walls, but Daniel no longer noticed. He and Laura shared the firelight, occasionally glancing at each other, exchanging small words, soft smiles. The tension outside the cabin remained, but inside, trust and warmth grew. Daniel realized the night was about more than surviving a storm. It was about understanding someone, connecting with another human being on a level that didn't require words all the time. Laura, too, seemed to relax. Her earlier worries slowly replaced by a quiet sense of companionship as darkness settled deeper outside. Both felt the weight of the long night ahead. The storm would not pass quickly, and they had to rely on each other. For the first time, Daniel noticed the emotional depth in Laura's eyes. Not sadness, exactly, but the kind of strength that had been shaped by years of challenges and resilience. It was a night neither would forget. Trapped by a winter storm, they found themselves sharing warmth, conversation, and silent understanding. The cold outside was fierce, but inside, a fragile. Emotional connection had begun to take root, built on trust, care, and human vulnerability. The snowstorm raged on. But for Daniel and Laura, the real challenge had become something quieter, deeper, and far more meaningful: keeping hope, courage, and connection alive through the night. When he reached the cabin, he parked beside a stack of firewood and stepped out into the growing wind. Before he even knocked, the front door opened. "Daniel." Laura greeted him with a smile that always made people relax. Come in. This weather is turning rough." He brushed snow off his jacket and stepped inside. The cabin smelled like cinnamon and burning wood. A small fire glowed in the fireplace, offering a cozy break from the cold. "Ethan told me you were coming," she said. "I've got the papers ready." Daniel nodded. "I'll take them and get out of your way. The storm seems to be getting stronger." Laura disappeared briefly into her home office and returned with a brown folder. Daniel took it with a grateful smile, but when he turned toward the door, the wind slammed into it with a force strong enough to make both of them freeze. Laura hurried beside him. "Hold on, let me check." She pulled the door open again, but this time the scene outside looked completely different. Snow was falling so thick it blurred the trees. The wind howled like something alive, and the temperature felt like it had dropped 10 degrees in minutes. "That's not good," Daniel murmured. "Not good at all," she said, pulling the door shut quickly. "This storm wasn't supposed to hit until later tonight." Daniel pulled out his phone. No signal. The wind knocked against the cabin again, making the windows rattle. He tried opening a weather app, but nothing loaded. Laura walked to one of the windows, pulling the curtain aside. "Look at the road," she said. Daniel joined her. The narrow forest road leading back to town was already disappearing under a thick layer of snow. It would be dangerous to drive, maybe even impossible. "I don't think you should leave," Laura said gently. "You won't make it far." Daniel nodded, accepting reality even though tension curled in his chest. "Yeah, I think I should stay until it calms down." "Good," she said, her voice warm but filled with concern. "Storms like this can turn serious fast." The lights flickered for a moment, and both of them looked up instinctively. A soft hum filled the room, then steadied. Laura sighed and placed a hand over her heart. "Let's hope the power stays on." Daniel offered a small smile. "Well, at least you've got a good fireplace." "That's true," she said, giving him a quiet, grateful look. "And now I guess I've got company." The storm outside intensified quickly, turning the world beyond the windows into a blur of white. Inside, the cabin felt smaller, warmer. and strangely intimate, and in a romantic way, but in a way that made Daniel suddenly aware of the situation. Two people. One cabin. A winter storm growing worse by the minute. Neither of them knew it yet. But this unexpected night was about to change everything for both of them. The storm outside showed no signs of slowing. Snow piled higher. The wind rattled the cabin, and the world beyond the windows had disappeared into a white blur. Inside, Daniel and Laura had settled near the fireplace, wrapped in blankets, sharing the warmth. The firelight painted their faces with soft glows. And for the first time that night, silence felt comforting rather than tense. Laura leaned slightly forward, her eyes reflecting the flickering flames. "It's nights like these," she began softly, "that make you realize how small we are compared to everything else." Daniel nodded, feeling the weight of her words. He had always admired Laura's calm, thoughtful nature. But hearing her speak so openly made him notice the depth of her strength. She wasn't just his best friend's mom anymore. She was a person shaped by life, someone who carried her past with quiet dignity. "I guess it's easy to get lost in routines," Daniel said, "and forget that life can change in a moment." Laura smiled faintly, looking at him with eyes that held both warmth and sadness. "Exactly. One minute everything feels normal, and the next you're stuck facing something you didn't expect. Sometimes all you need is someone beside you." Her words weren't romantic in a typical sense, but they carried emotion, a subtle bond forming in the quiet of the storm. Daniel felt a lump in his throat, not from longing, but from empathy. Being here, sharing the fire and the blankets, made him realize how human connection could become urgent in moments of uncertainty. They started talking more freely, stories slipping out naturally. Laura spoke about the divorce, about feeling lonely during long winters, and about how she had tried to rebuild her life. Daniel listened quietly, careful not to interrupt, his presence alone seeming to give her comfort. Then he shared some of his own struggles, college pressures, family expectations, and the small fears that had kept him awake at night. Laura listened intently, her expression soft, sometimes nodding, sometimes letting silence fill the space. The storm outside grew louder, but inside the room felt safe, almost cocooned, as if nothing else existed except their shared presence. At one point, Laura shifted slightly to get more comfortable under the blanket. Her hand brushed against Daniel's lightly, a simple, accidental contact, but it made both pause. Neither spoke. Neither pulled away. The touch carried reassurance, a human need for warmth and connection. Daniel's chest tightened. Not with desire, but with recognition of the bond forming. He realized this night was about more than just surviving the storm. It was about understanding someone, being present without needing words or explanations. Laura, too, seemed to relax. Her shoulders loosened, and for the first time that evening, she smiled in a way that felt completely genuine. Minutes passed with them talking, sharing small laughs at trivial stories and moments of quiet reflection. Each time the wind slammed against the cabin walls, they both flinched slightly, but then looked at each other and exchanged a knowing glance. They weren't alone. They were surviving together. As the fire dwindled, the room grew colder, but they adjusted closer to each other instinctively. The blankets wrapped them both, and the warmth between them became more than just physical. It was emotional, a sense of trust, safety, and understanding. Daniel realized that he had never felt this level of closeness with anyone outside his family or friends. Laura's presence was comforting, grounding, and complicated in the most human way. At one point, she looked at him seriously. "It's strange," she said softly, "how a storm can bring people together. Normally, I'd be alone tonight, sitting by the fire, thinking about things I don't want to think about. But with you here, it's different." Daniel met her gaze. "I know what you mean. It's not about the storm outside. It's about knowing someone is there with you, someone who cares." They shared a moment of silence, letting the words settle. The storm outside raged on, but inside the cabin felt like a safe haven. It was more than just survival. It was connection, understanding, and the quiet emotional intimacy that comes from sharing a vulnerable moment without judgment. The night continued with them huddled by the fire, occasionally sharing small conversations, sometimes just sitting quietly. Each glance, each smile, each gesture built a silent understanding between them. It was tender, meaningful, and deeply emotional. Neither spoke of what the morning might bring, but both knew the night had changed something. The bond they had formed was real, quiet, and respectful. It was a connection built on human warmth and the simple act of being there for each other during a moment of uncertainty. As the hours passed, the storm seemed less frightening, because the cabin no longer felt like a place of fear, felt like a place of understanding, of emotional closeness, and a shared humanity that neither Daniel nor Laura had expected to experience that night. Morning came quietly, almost as if the world outside had held its breath during the night. The storm had finally slowed, leaving the town and forest coated in thick, sparkling snow. Sunlight poured through the cabin windows, reflecting off the white landscape. And for the first time since the evening before, Daniel and Laura could see the world beyond their temporary shelter. Daniel woke first, stretching and noticing the soft warmth still lingering from the fire and the blankets. The room smelled faintly of wood smoke and cinnamon, carrying the memory of the night before. He glanced at Laura, who was still sleeping, curled up under the blankets with a calm, peaceful expression. She looked so serene that he hesitated to wake her, careful not to disturb the quiet comfort she had found. After a few moments, Laura stirred. Her eyes opened, meeting Daniel's with a soft, gentle smile. "Good morning," she said quietly, brushing snowflakes of thought and emotion away from the edges of her mind. There was a hint of embarrassment, but mostly relief they had survived the night together. "Morning," Daniel replied, his voice low but steady. He didn't mention how close they had been during the night. Some things didn't need words. They had shared warmth, conversation, and comfort. And that connection was understood without explanation. They both moved carefully, aware that the cabin was small, but the moment was tender rather than awkward. Laura adjusted the blankets, wrapping them around herself again, while Daniel prepared a pot of coffee on the small stove. The aroma filled the room, signaling a normality that contrasted sharply with the chaos of the storm outside. "Did you sleep okay?" Daniel asked, handing her a steaming mug. Laura took it with a grateful nod. "Better than I expected," she admitted. "I didn't think I'd feel so calm last night. Usually I'd be worrying alone." Her voice carried warmth and honesty, and Daniel felt a quiet happiness that she had trusted him enough to feel safe. Outside, the snow stretched in every direction, untouched and silent except for the occasional drip from the melting roof. Daniel glanced at the road, now visible under the soft morning light. The storm had passed, but it had left the world changed. Everything seemed clearer, quieter, and brighter as they sipped coffee together. They talked about small things: the road, the snowfall, what Ethan would say when he arrived. But beneath the ordinary conversation lay an emotional understanding that was far more important. They didn't need to speak about the closeness of the previous night. It was understood. Their time together had created a bond that was quiet, emotional, and respectful. At one point, Laura looked at Daniel, her eyes reflecting both gratitude and a touch of melancholy. "Thank you," she said softly, "for staying with me, for keeping me company, and for just being here." Daniel nodded, feeling a warmth that went beyond the fire and blankets. "I'm glad I was," he replied. "I wouldn't have wanted to be anywhere else." The storm had passed, but it had left a mark on both of them. They had shared vulnerability, quiet fears, and long silences that spoke louder than words. That night had brought them closer, not in a way that was inappropriate, but in a way that showed human connection at its most meaningful. They had protected each other from the cold, and in doing so, they had discovered an emotional closeness neither expected. Soon, Ethan called from the town. He had managed to check in despite the lingering snow and promised to come get them when the roads were clear. Daniel answered, letting Laura watch the snow silently outside. The world was bright, quiet, and safe now. But the memory of the night lingered like a soft warmth in their hearts. When they stepped outside after Ethan's arrival, the snow crunched under their feet. The air was crisp, clean, and bright, But both Daniel and Laura felt a silent hesitation. The night had created a unique connection, one that neither could simply erase. They exchanged a glance filled with understanding, gratitude, and the quiet acknowledgement of something deeply human. Laura smiled gently. "I'll never forget last night," she said, her voice almost a whisper. "It meant a lot to me." Daniel smiled back. "Neither will I," he replied. "It was special." As Ethan's car appeared down the snow-covered road, Daniel and Laura shared one last look, a mixture of warmth, emotional closeness, and unspoken feelings. They knew that life would continue, that boundaries and responsibilities remained. But the night had changed them. It had reminded them both how important trust, care, and quiet companionship could be. The snowstorm was gone, but the bond created during it stayed, soft and steady, glowing in their hearts like the fading embers of the fire. They had survived the storm together,